Yes. Good morning. My name is Michels, and I'm very glad to be here and talk to you about standardizing graph database functionality support for that one in a broad context and especially within ISO. That's one of the things I'm doing. I work for Oracle, and as that part of the work, I'm representing Oracle in the SQL standards committees, both within the US and internationally in ISO. And as that, two colleagues of mine that are also members of the ISO SQL committee, Keith Hare and Jim Melton, we had a discussion recently within ISO about the future of both SQL, what kind of functionality could be added, and in general, database languages. I'll get to that in a moment, and graph databases came up. So that's kind of why I'm here, to give you an update on what has recently happened in the SQL world and in ISO with respect to database languages in general. So you've seen similar disclaimers. It's all informational here, so you can trust me, but you don't have to. And I may lie to you, but I try not to. Quick intro, then standards 101, why, where, who, and how. I will more or less skip over that. Touch on only a few slides, thanks to Hannes' presentation. He already touched on why do we do standards. So that took care of a big part of that part of my presentation. And then I will focus mostly on WG3, which is the work. And basically explain a little bit the process of how standardization works, basically. And in the end, I would like to ask LDBC or the Graph Query Task Force to get involved in that standardization effort. And I'd like to discuss with you how we can accomplish that, basically. So basically, who are we? I already introduced myself. Then Keith Hare, he's a convener of WG3, which is basically the chair of that group. And Jim Melton, he is the editor of the SQL standard, does basically all the writing up, basically. People bring forward proposals, and he will combine all the proposals into the standard. Basically, that's the job of the editor. And he's also the chair of SE32. What that means, I'll explain in a little while. What SE32 is. Okay, so standards 101, what is standardization? I'll just skip over these slides. Why standardize? Thanks to Hannes, we don't need to spend a lot of time on this slide either, because there's a benefit for implementers and for users. We do standardization. So where does standardization happen? So it could all our employees are the standard runs a operating system, right? That's a local standard just for that company, right? Then others are de facto standards, right? And de jure standards are where there's a formal internationally or national standards organization behind it, basically. So ISO internationally, within the US, it's ANSI, in Germany, it's DIN, and other countries, basically each country has their own national standards organization as well. And when do standards happen, right? Basically, when the time is right. When is the time right? When there's a benefit to it for involved parties, implementers, users, and so on, right? And if you have a group that is really interested in doing the standardization, right? And so how can it happen? So sometimes standards are developed before the actual products implementing those standards, right? Sometimes products are already out there, and then the standard is just a reflection of what the products are already doing. And then there's somewhat of a combination just in time. So standards are developed alongside when the functionality is also implemented by various implementers, and then there's a kind of a feedback loop from the implementers to the standards and vice versa, right? And I've been, in my career, I've done all three of these things within the SQL standard, and they all have their benefits and they all have their disadvantages. And but from a personal experience, the most fruitful is a kind of the just-in-time, when you really have the collaboration between when you develop the standard, but also you have implementers implementing it at the same time. So who does standardization? Well, basically a diverse group. The more diverse the group is, the better the standard will be, right? So we have implementers, we have users, we have people from research, we have lots and lots of different people, basically, that do the standardization. And just a list with some standards organization de jure, standards organization, and the only two things I'd like to point out here are the first two, ISO and IEC. So ISO stands for the International Organization for Standardization. IEC is the International Electrotechnical Commission, and I'm pointing these out here because these are basically the parent organization for where the SQL standard happens, basically. I'll have a slide on that one in a little while. And we get now to that slide. So WG3 basically stands for Working Group 3, and that's where the actual SQL standardization is happening. But WG3 is not really a group by itself. You see it basically at the bottom of the chart here, right, in this corner here. And if you go up, or if you, let's say you start at the top, we have ISO on the one side and we have IEC on the other side. And both of those organizations do international standards. And for the purpose of information technology standards, they have joined their forces, basically. So each one does individual standards, but in the context of information technology standards, they have formed a joint technical committee, JTC1 in this case. And below that are certain subcommittees, SCs. And SC32 is the subcommittee for data management and interchange. And within that subcommittee, there are several working groups. And one of them is Working Group 3, which does database languages, basically. And that's where I'm most active. And basically, so the actual work happens in the working group, but all the parent organizations, they are then responsible for actually doing the formal standards process, basically the voting on the standard, whether it becomes an international standard or not.
Does the voting stop at the JTC, or does it go up to ISO and IEC?
It is the actual voting on the international standard is at JTC1 level, basically. So I'll have a slide on with the separate phases, and depending on the phase, it's actually at a lower level. Sometimes it's just at SC32, but on the whether it becomes an international standard, the final vote is at the JTC1 level. And and that's basically the process for the SQL standardization. And if we were to look at how it would work for graph query language, it's basically the same. Could be the same, right? So slides, and then if you forgot what an acronym was, there's explanation here as well that tells you again, oh, WD3, that was Working Group 3. Now I remember. Okay, so what has been happening in WD3? We just published a new version of the SQL standard at the end of last year. We call it SQL 2016 because it was published in 2016, obviously. And it basically incorporates all of the previous versions, the functionality that was in the previous versions, and three big new functionality items. One is support for JSON. Another one is called row pattern recognition. Basically, you can apply a regular expression on a set of rows and find a pattern in those rows. And third one is polymorphic table functions. Basically, that allows you to have table as input to functions and table as output to functions. And the structure of those tables is not known at the time when you define the functions, but only at query time. So the output depends on the input, basically. And there's still work going on a new part to support multidimensional arrays in SQL as well, but that has not been finalized yet. Yes.
Just a quick question on these items. You have your categorization of collaboration, document, etc.
Right.
How would you sort of peg these examples? Was JSON?
So JSON was just in time. So I was involved in that one, and there was, back then I worked for a different company, and different companies worked together on standardizing, and implementers were implementing the functionality at the same time and giving feedback on that one. Similar row pattern recognition, even though I was not that involved in that aspect. And polymorphic table functions, there the standard is a little bit ahead of the implementation. So what I can only tell from my company, it has not shipped yet, so in the product, right? So I don't know about other companies, whether they have shipped it yet, but it's already in the standard, so it's a little bit ahead of the curve. But there was definitely collaboration. So well, a little bit to answer your question a little bit more detail. In the 90s, there was a lot of standardization in advance of people were thinking, well, that's good functionality to have, let's put it in the standard. And so that's why the standard blew up a little bit in content. And some of that functionality has not yet been implemented. So, and since I started after that in 2000, when I get involved, I try not to be too advanced in what the standard does, but rather have the collaboration effort, or maybe just document what has been done already, if need be. Okay, so what is going to happen for the next version of the SQL standard? So whenever we meaning WD3, finish up a new version of the SQL standard, we, well, think about, so what is next? What can we do next? Where's the industry heading, basically? What can we do to advance the database community in general and SQL specifically, right? And so over the last 2-3 meetings, we came up with kind of a list of things to do. And one of the big topic seems to be big data. We need to support big data better, right? And but also one of the items that came up was graph queries as well. So, however, just because there's this list does not mean that all or even any of that functionality will end up in the next version of the SQL standard. So that's just a kind of a wish list, if you will. There's nothing nobody that tells us we must include this for the next version to be published or anything like that. And vice versa, anybody or any participant can come in with a proposal, proposing some totally different functionality that has nothing to do with this list for the next version, just because I say, well, it's good to have that functionality, it's valuable, right? So, okay, and since we had that at the most recent meeting, which was just 2 weeks ago, we had in-depth discussion about graph databases, basically. And the feeling in the working group was that, yeah, now the time is right to look at standardizing the functionality here as well, right? And there are basically 2 aspects to this one. One is extending SQL with graph support, right? But also have a standalone graph query language. And that would be kind of a new project. And since I know Hassan and Oscar, we had talked about this one, and they told me about LDBC, right? And basically, here, you're the experts, basically, in graph query language, basically. You heard already from Hannes the summary report, right? So that made me feel very confident in that it would be good to get you involved, basically, in the work that we want to do at ISO. So the working group meets 2 to 3 times a year. So we just had a meeting in January. The next one will be in June. And in June, we are probably going to do 2 things. One is to apply for a project split for SQL Graph, meaning extension to the SQL language. And the other one would be a new work item to do standalone graph query language, basically, right? And when I say query, I don't necessarily mean read-only retrieval operation, right? But could include DML as well as DDL, right? So just want to make that clear, that because there was some question earlier about should it include update or not, right? And so I mentioned project split for SQL graphs and the new work items. So that leads me then to the next slide, which outlines the process of the formal standardization. If we do standard at ISO level, what does it mean to?
Just before we get into the process, could you just dwell on this concept of a project split? So I guess WG3, as you described it, is responsible for database technology.
Right, database language.
So there's no, SQL is not in that name. It is database.
Exactly, database language. WG3, the name is database languages. Yes,
Sorry,
yes.
yeah, but it's not got SQL in the name.
Exactly.
So has WG3 ever become involved in an attempt to standardize anything other than SQL as a database language?
Not as long as I'm participating, so not in the last 18, 17 years. And exactly. It's something new. It's definitely something new and something exciting. So, so project split. What does it mean? So there's a project from like in the 80s where SQL was first standardized, right? And ever since, each new version is basically a project split of that one. Like if you think about source code, it's a fork, right? I mean, kind of a thing. It's a split, basically. And so in order for the working group to work on something and to produce something, we need to have a project that we can work on. So that the project split would enable us to officially work on extending SQL with graph functionality.
By creating a branch.
Exactly. So SQL 2016 is done. Now we are looking at SQL 2020, right? So we need to do a split, basically, from the old one to work on the new one.
And that's effectively rechartering for a new sort of phase of SQL work. Is that correct? Or?
I think, yeah, you could call it that one. So we don't, I mean, we usually don't, I mean, there's no official rechartering, but I mean, I guess if you're familiar with other standards organizations that have a chart and that need to recharter every so often, yeah, you could call it that.
Who agrees? Who are you applying to?
To SC32, basically. So for this product split, it's within SC32, and even for the new work item, it's all within SC32. So, and there's, the vote is on a national body basis, basically. So each national body represented in SC32 gets to have a vote. Yeah. And other working groups could say, well, no, that functionality should be standardized in our working group, for example, right? If it would be better suited there. Right. Okay. So the process. So assuming we have a new work item proposal or project split, it basically then starts with, we're going to develop a working draft, right? So there's a base document, and the base document could be initially empty, right? And then proposals come in that tell you, we should have this, and it should look like this, right? For example, right? And then other proposals come in, yeah, this is a good idea, but I don't like that, so we should change it to that and that, for example, right? And we do this over a couple of iterations, either a single meeting or multiple meetings over 1 year or 2 years. And then at one point, the committee probably feels like, okay, there's enough material in the working draft here, it's worthwhile to progress to the next stage, which is then the CD ballot. CD stands for committee draft, so that means the document is a certain stage, has certain functionality, and we send it out to the other members of SC32 basically to get comments on that one. So comments could be either something is broken, there's a typo here, something is horribly broken, or certain functionality is missing, or certain functionality should be taken out because it doesn't fit in, right? And once all the comments are collected, there's a comment resolution meeting where, again, people write proposals addressing those comments, either saying, yeah, we agree with the comment and we are going to implement that and that solution, or they say, no, the comment is mistaken for that and that reason. Or, yeah, the comment describes a language opportunity for a new functionality. We agree with that one, but right now we don't have the time or resources to address this, so we put it on the wish list for the next version, for example, right? And when that is done, there's, again, then a new document, which is the DIS, the Draft International Standard. And again, there's another ballot on that one, where, again, people will look at it, read it, and say, okay, looks good, or certain things need to be fixed. So at that stage, we do mostly bug fixes. So we do not introduce new functionality at that stage, but only look for, if you will, beta testing, right? Kind of look for bugs, basically. And again, comments are solicited and they are addressed. And once that is all successfully completed, there's one final ballot, the final draft international standards ballot, but that's just an up or down ballot. So countries can only vote yes or no. But usually if you reach that stage, everybody will vote yes. Right.
Where does the actual work and discussion take place, and what's the status in terms of membership of the different national working groups, international working groups, and what's the voting? How does it, can you just go over that sort of side of things? We imagine this actually got kicked off. What would happen with people in the room who were interested? Where would they go?
Very, very good question. Let me move on to the next. So that just explains this one. How can you get involved? Just what you ask for, right? So be careful what you ask for.
Yeah. As long as you keep trying to tell us the truth.
Yeah. So you can go to the meeting as an expert. And you go to the meeting as an expert, you need to be credentialed by your national body. So in the US, it's ANSI, and in Germany, it's DIN, as I mentioned. Other countries, I mean, the UK is involved, Canada is involved, China and Japan, usually that are the regular participants in WG3. But even if your country is not yet involved, but you want to get involved, get in touch with your national body. If you don't know which one that is, send me an email and I will be able to figure that out, right? And then you can get involved. And that's kind of there you probably have the most influence because you're directly at the table, right? You sit in the meetings, you can bring forward proposals, you can argue for or against the proposal, right? If you can do that, that would be great. So one thing that we can, and I think we should do, is establish a liaison between WG3 or SC32 and LDBC or the query task force, right? To allow us officially to exchange information, because otherwise ISO has very strict rules about the visibility of documents. So if you don't pay for it, you're not allowed to see it. But if you have a liaison, we can certainly give you the documents, right? And you can comment on them and vice versa, and you can provide input directly, right? And then there's, informally, you can work with any existing W3 expert, right? That would be me or other people, right? And so we could work that one. But the most important thing here is big red, right? So whatever, I mean, if you have a contribution, we are happy to see it, basically, right? In whatever form. Right?
What about the voting side?
Pardon?
Voting bit of it? Who gets to decide? What is it? This contentious issue? Is it based on national?
Right. So in the working group, the vote. Let me switch. I have a slide, a backup slide on the members, basically. So decisions at the working group are on the consensus level, but consensus does not necessarily mean unanimity. So the convener at the beginning of the meeting will establish what it means, consensus. So you could say, if 5 are in favor and 1 is against and 3 are abstaining, that is consensus. If 4 are in favor but 3 are against this, that's not consensus necessarily, right? So that proposal would not be accepted, right? And today, it's everybody at the table has a vote, basically. Each expert at the table has a vote. And that only changed recently, like a couple of years ago. Before that, it was each national body only had 1 vote. So everybody in the US had, I mean, the US as a whole had only 1 vote. Now, if the US sends 5 expert members, there will be 5 votes, basically. But that doesn't mean that they're all voting in the same, right? Because they are from different companies, so they may have different interests, right?
How many people are at the table usually?
At the most recent meeting was always around 10, roundabout. So we have 6 countries. Some countries like Japan, Germany, they send 1 or 2, and the US, we usually send at least 3, sometimes 4 or 5. Yeah. So China 1 to 3.
I understand that this liaison between LDC and WG3 should be formal?
Yes, there's a process, and I'm not familiar with that process, but Keith and Jim, they know all the ins and outs of that process, and we can get that started on. Because ISO defines certain levels of liaisons, depending on with what kind of organization, and so it's something formal. So yes. And, yeah.
What
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, well, yes and no. These are the countries that are participating right now, but any country basically can participate at ISO level, basically, and whether they are a member of JTC1 depends on whether they then are a member of SE32 and so on. And there are two classes of members, at least two that I know of. One is a P member. They get to vote, but they also have the obligation to vote on things. So they have, basically it's a right and a privilege to vote, basically. And then there are observers. They can be at the table, but they don't get to vote. But they also don't have to vote on each issue, right? So, I mean, in SE32, there may be certain things that you're really not interested in. So you're thinking, why should I vote on that one? But as a P member, you have to vote. Otherwise, if you don't vote enough, you will lose your privilege to vote, basically.
Observers get to speak up as well.
Pardon? Yes, yes. Everybody gets to speak up and have their say. And everybody, I mean, at the working group level, everybody can bring in a proposal. Right?
To be a P member, you've got to be in the whole of that stack from JTC1, SE32, WD3, and commit to vote on everything.
Not necessarily. Let's go back to the slide. So you can be a P member for SE32 only, and don't have to be necessarily a P member all the way up to the stack, right? So the exact rules I'm not familiar with, but if that's of interest, I can find out. So I know that, well, for NEO, I don't know. I mean, you're US-based, you're in the UK, right? You're Germany, so
The Swedish Standards Institute
yeah.
was ready for a coup on this one.
No, well, they're actually at when in the early 2000s there was actually a guy participating from Sweden in the SQL standards. So Sweden may be actually already a P member potentially. I don't know. I would need to look up, right? So, I mean, there are many ways to get involved.
If you are a P member, is that a full-time occupation? Is lots of it going on, or how much? Because then you are in all those working groups.
No, you don't have to be in all those working groups. No. It's if you as an expert only want to get involved in WG3 through the Netherlands, you can certainly do that, right? And we also had a participant from the Netherlands, and he's still semi-active. He doesn't come to the meetings anymore, but he still maintains the technical corrigendum. So Stephen Cannon, I don't know. I can get you in touch with him if.
Okay, I think we are already in your last slide, which was
Yeah,
today.
exactly. So,
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I've got one last question. So you said you could start with an empty document.
Right.
Here we have a situation where we have PGQL, we have OpenCipher, and we have the work that's coming out of the Query Language Task Force to name but three. Is there some kind of process of specifying inputs into so if this new outfit to do with independent graph query language Cambridge systems, how is that normally handled in terms of taking existing work in the area?
right. So basically, somebody has to come forward with a proposal, basically. So if there are 3 proposals out there, I guess I would take the one from my company and write it down, write it up in a suitable form. Other people will do the same for theirs. And it's not that just because there are 3 proposals out there, some good soul will look at all of them and propose something that makes sense. So you need to find somebody who is invested in that one and wants to propose something to make work happen, right? So I have one slide that kind of basically has a little bit more information about what the proposal is, right? Kind of a thing. So if there are 3 competing things out there, and let's say all 3 were submitted, then there would be discussion within WG3, and the discussion could go anywhere. I mean, at the end there could be a vote, and if was split up 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for each proposal, then none would be accepted, right? But what would most likely happen is probably an ad hoc or subgroup would be formed for those guys to work together and see whether they can find a common ground on how to come up with a good base document, basically, initially.
Okay, thank you. I think in the interest of time, in the interest of learning, we need to move on to the last one for the
It's just a sanity.
and thank you, of course.
Thank you.